for a little bit, a last-second guest. Well, we set this up about the top of the hour. State Representative Cedric Glover is here. Okay. Matt had the perfect intro for this. He said, when Cedric comes in, Blackface, go!
We just sit back.
That was going to be it. It's in the news of late pertaining to a whole lot of people, including the Virginia governor and whoever the third in command is. And then there was the Joy Behar thing yesterday where she says, no, I was going to a Halloween party as a beautiful black African woman. And then I started running down the list. It is Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon. And there was the episode of Bewitched. And I said to Aaron to start the segment when I was talking about that, I said, would you say to me unequivocally that anyone who has ever appeared in blackface has committed an act of overt racism? And she said, yes. So let me ask you the same question.
Well, given the context that existed at the time that it happened, it is probably a true statement, but is also one that has to be looked at within the context of the time that it occurred. Blackface in 1930 is not the same as blackface in 1970. Blackface in 1970 is not the same as blackface in 1990. Blackface in 1990 is certainly not the same as blackface in 2019. I think as different subcultures within our country begin to become more empowered and have the ability to be able to more effectively express those things that they find to be objectionable, insulting, diminishing, marginalizing, is where you end up seeing these discussions go forward.
Well, wait a minute. Help me with something. You're a child of the 70s?
Correct.
I guess. If you saw Bewitched, I need you to help me with this. If you saw Bewitched and you saw blackface, it had to be offensive to you, or was it something you didn't even notice?
Well, it's more fundamental than Bewitched for me, because I did watch Bewitched. In fact, I remember the two Darrens. But for me, it goes back to Bugs Bunny. Those various Bugs characters, the Daffy Duck characters, all of which were grounded, or even go back Dr. Seuss, and even his characters that came through wartime, where you had very negative characterizations of not only Jews, but Japanese, blacks, and others. And so it is all within the context of the circumstances that these things occur. And you also have to look at the degree to which the particular targeted group was empowered to be able to effectively advocate against those types of depictions.
Not in a position to come out and say, hey, that's not appropriate.
Absolutely.
Okay, that helps me. That helps me a lot.
So that Bewitched episode where Samantha and Darren are in quote unquote blackface.
Well, and but also the awareness and the understanding that it actually is wrong. Because when I saw Bugs Bunny as a 5-year-old, and he's in blackface and the blackface and the white lips and the exaggerated speech,
the minstrel show,
the minstrel, absolutely. As a 5-year-old, that was funny. What I didn't realize exactly what it meant in terms of the history of it, all the way back to the 1830s and the whole origin of minstrel shows.
So is there, what I asked Erin was, and she kind of went, I don't know. Is there, say theoretically for Joy Behar or Jimmy Kimmel or Billy Crystal doing Sammy Davis Jr., is that what you're talking about in the sense of context, or is that as offensive to you, to other black people, and is there a, for lack of a better term, statute of limitations?
Well, I think it's certainly, as you get to a point to where you know better, you do better. And I think probably one of the most seminal points of this whole issue is a name that we haven't mentioned yet, or two names we haven't mentioned yet. That's Ted Danson and Whoopi Goldberg.
We did this morning, earlier on.
If you remember that
Friars
instance,
Club deal.
Sure.
Friars Club, Ted is there, I think, roasting Whoopi, and they're dating at the time, so I guess, that gives him his card.
Right.
I'm in the club. I have the ability to be able to engage in such things.
Right.
That's like coming to the cookout and thinking you can say the N-word. No.
Okay.
But didn't you kind of
It's not okay.
Not okay.
So as for lack of a better term, pissed off as that makes you now, didn't she sort of give him the card, though?
Certainly. And it became a lightning rod issue that resulted in a substantial amount of dialogue within the black community itself, because that was a part of it. He was there with her support, her permission, her umbrella of protection, her thumbs up, her okay. And the question became, it was a mirror of reflection back on the black community and the white community. And the discussion from that was, guys, at this point in our history, this is not okay.
Is it
We need to
okay?
learn
Is
from
it
it and do better.
okay for anyone to put on blackface?
Well, I mean, some of these things I think are still evolving, and obviously you mentioned the Sammy Davis Jr., Billy Crystal, and what have you. Great comedy, and certainly a great honor.
And Sammy Davis Jr. loved it.
Absolutely, but it is still something that you have to go back and realize has its roots, has its origins in something that is very demeaning, very negative, and something that we ought to be attempting to evolve
Okay, so
away
somebody's
from.
yelling at you right now. Wait a second, man. What about that Wayans Brothers movie, White Chicks?
Well, that's a concern as well. That's an issue as well. But the origin of black people in whiteface does not have the same racial dynamic to
Absolutely.
it that white people in blackface does. You can go right back to the 1830s, and you can trace the Jim Crow character, the songs, the tradition, and everything that it was about, especially when you look at it within the context of empowering middle class and poor whites at that time in terms of how they saw themselves in relation to black people.
Is there in your mind, or better yet, in your heart, a difference in the reaction you have when you see the governor of Virginia's yearbook photo as opposed to Billy Crystal doing Sammy Davis? And what is that reaction?
Well, those are two different points of intent, but now the origin is still the same. The intent and origin of blackface is a negative depiction of black people.
So what do
a
you
negative
think?
characterization
What do you feel
of
when
black
you see
people.
that? Do you get pissed off? Do you go, oh man, they just don't know better? I mean,
They're ignorant.
It's not that you can speak for every black guy in town, but what is your reaction, and would you say is the general reaction?
Frankly, I have a different reaction to someone who has the old minstrel show type blackface as opposed to the current 80s, 90s, the young guys who are my age, imitating Curtis Blow and rappers and what have you. But the origin of it is still the same. The intent is still the same. It's still intended as a negative depiction and characterization
Wait.
of black people.
The intention, and we got a question online. The intention of the Bewitched episode, she says it was intended to make a statement against racism. That episode was.
Now you gotta remember.
Not following that.
I remember but to get into the actual plot of it and what have you, I have to go back and take a look at it again. But understand, and here's an example I'll give you. As mayor, had a city employee within an open meeting in an effort to indicate and affirm how diligent they were with the city's resources, used Jew as a verb.
Oh boy. Okay.
And they were oblivious to the fact that was wrong and offensive, and did not understand, because within the context where they lived,
You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. Well, and you don't know, and you don't understand, and you don't have an appreciation for it. And these are the types of issues that exist within a similar context.
So
Should these people lose their jobs? Should they be losing their jobs?
I mean, it is. I don't know if it's something that you absolutely lose your job over. I think it's how you. I think the most important thing is not necessarily that which happens, but how you respond to it. And certainly, of all of these things, with regard to the blackface situation, the one that's most disturbing is the governor of Virginia's response, where initially you acknowledge that this is your page. I mean, as I have shared to folks, your yearbook page within the 1970s, 80s context was the example of your Facebook page today. It's a reflection of those assemblage of things that are important to you, your profile, your portrait, your important factors. So to say that this is a guy who's not just in high school, he's coming out of medical school.
a 25-year-old man.
Exactly. That these are not things that are reflective of who you are, you know, is I think a little less than being intellectually honest. So admit that it's you initially, do a mea culpa, and then come back the next day and say, oh, no, that's not me at all. I don't know who these folks are. That is disappointing, disturbing, and I think gets you into the realm of we need to really do an examination of what this says about your character.
And maybe you should move on.
And maybe you should move on.
Yeah.
The attorney general who lays it out, gets out in front, you know, that's something I think you look at within a different context, at least at this point. So no, I don't think there's any absolutes to it. I think it's what is it and how is it that you actually respond to what the circumstances are. And certainly for those of us who are, you know, 70s babies, 80s babies, and what have you, it's an example to those who are the millennial generation of exactly how it is that the things that you do and that you memorialize can have consequences for you well into life.
Cedric
wow,
Glover.
that's going to be, pardon me, phew, in the cell phone age.
Oh, absolutely.
Gosh.
There's nobody listening right now under the age of 35 who can ever run for political office.
Well, and those of us who are of the 80s generation who came of high school and we are those Gen Xers, that
Burn
sandwich
the
generation.
yearbooks.
Absolutely. I mean, we have been comfortable in knowing that we were free.
Boy, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Man. Cedric, thank you for coming in.
Yearbooks and memory books.